what took you out of youth ministry and got you to the point where you're now like flexing your theology muscle the size of Terry Crews as the honest youth pastor? Like what was the bridge between those two things?
So I'll try to keep this short because it's a long story.
But Marvel makes long origin stories.
It's true,
okay,
they true.
So it's okay.
So essentially, I had gotten out of college, and I wasn't, and I've never been like super actively looking for a church. Every other guy that was and girl that was in my ministry class was like fervently trying to find like their first place, and I was like, that's cool. We're just going to move back home and see what happens. Like, I know I spent all this money on this college degree, but I don't like, it was never a thing where I was like, I'm just going to pursue this and do this thing. Partially part of that might've been because I went to college because my wife went to that college. And I was like, that sounds good. If you want to talk about pursuit level, that's pursuit level. So anyway, so we got out of college and we're like, well, let's just move back down home. And we had attended this church for a while. I did an interim youth pastor position somewhere really fast and probably about 6 months. And then we came back to the church where we had gone before. That youth pastor became a lead pastor in another church locally. And they basically were looking for somebody. And before he left, he was like, well, Michael's been helping. Michael obviously he's got a degree for it. So, what do you think? And we talked about it. And I was like, yeah, well, sure. Why not? I mean, I'm already here. I'm already in this, I'm already with the kids. And we did that for probably, my numbers are probably off, but around 2 years or so, 2.5, maybe 3. And then in my particular denomination, what happens is that the pastors come up for a vote every 4 years. And when the pastor came up for a vote this time, he had, it was like 51-49 for and against.
Wait, so he lost to Joe Biden, the election? Sorry.
There's so many jokes you could throw in there. Basically, also within the bylaws, like if it falls onto your side, which he had the 51%, you can choose whether you want to stay or not. Because clearly, like half the church doesn't want you there. So like you get to choose, just make a wise decision. Nice. And he, for whatever reason, I don't ever ask him about it, but he decided to stay. And that lasted maybe a month and a half because there was enough, like the board members, elders, different churches call them different things. Ours calls them a board at the time. They were still like, yeah, but half the people don't want it. Was a deck stacked against him essentially. And so he left. But that, because of how that whole transition happened, there wasn't anybody in the wings. They hadn't been interviewing anybody. So we were without a pastor for like a month and a half, just with fill-in guys and whatever. And then the district leadership sent some resumes. Long story short, the guy came and he did a like a practice sermon, I guess, like just this is how I preach. And the congregation really liked him. Now, an important part of this story is that the pastor before was, I like to be like John MacArthur versus Stephen Furtick in the regards to their styles, like just to give people like a picture that they know. So
you said John MacArthur?
Yeah.
Help me to understand and the listeners. Is that good preaching? Is that bad communication? What does that mean?
So I'm talking about
Stephen Furtick's like good communication.
Yeah. So I'm saying the reason I use those comparisons is because it's much more like methodical, much more point driven, a lot more like background and history, things like that.
That's Stephen MacArthur.
Yeah.
Okay.
By and large, and people are going to pick that apart too. But anyway, that's the kind of idea. And then you have Furtick, which is like very energetic. Very good communicator, but by and large, in my humble opinion, not very good at exegetical work and just poor theology altogether.
Bird.
And yeah, watch the reviews. So then you have basically, you're shifting from one drastic thing to another drastic thing. And we tried to work together for like a year and a half, 2 years essentially. And our methodology was totally different as far as like, where was our outreach going? Because at the time, us shifting to like, we're going to talk about the hard questions. We're going to point you to the gospel, that sort of thing. Not that he wasn't doing that, but it was bringing in a lot of kids from unchurched families. And so 95% of our youth group was made up of these kids that, they cussed a lot. They were very rowdy. They didn't know how to behave. And
my friends.
There you go. And and that was causing an issue with some of the people that were in the church, but more so that were on the board. Some of the board people thought their kids weren't being taken care of because we had all this other, and we were admittedly scrambling to try to figure out how to adapt to the growth. And on top of that, his preaching style, I did not agree with. I thought it was Stephen Furtick style. So we really did try to work it out as long as we could. And then essentially what ended up happening was, again, the way this denomination works, the board makes the decisions. The pastor himself doesn't necessarily get a vote. Not that would have swayed anything, but just so people understand the things. And so they basically voted, without ever talking to me, to demote me to children's minister, and they were going to bring in the pastor's son as youth pastor. And I was like, well, I'm not really down for that. Not only just because this came out of nowhere, but because no.
What denomination is this?
It's the Wesleyan denomination.
Okay.
And so basically what ended up happening was they're like, well, we'll talk about it again. We'll work it out. Well, at that time, I'm working 2 or 3 jobs plus youth pastor. And so I'm at my second or third job that night, and I'm doing what I do, and I get a text and like, hey, don't come back. We'll just send you your last check. Don't worry about it. And I'm like, nah, hold on. So I call the guy and I'm like, I work for all of these companies that are going to handle this more professionally than the church is handling it. The people that, by the way, said that we're going to, like, my daughter was like baby dedicated there. Like, the congregation said you're going to help to raise her. You're going to give her a good example. Like, all of these things that you're turning your back on a lot of these things you said. And I was very aggravated. I mean, angry is probably more of a proper term for it. So on top of that, my wife was very connected to the church as far as she loved this church. I had gone here simply because, that's where she had grown up. And so there was a lot going on as far as her head and her family that were going through the same thing I was going through, but in a whole different level as far as emotionally. So that's how the account came about. We're transitioning out of this church, trying to find something. I didn't know what we were going to do. And I needed a place to vent. I was like, where in the world? Because I can't do it online because I'm friends with Facebook. At the time, Facebook was kind of the biggest thing. I'm Facebook friends with all these people. Clearly can't vent online because that's going to be unhelpful. I don't want to put all that on her because clearly she's going through a ton herself. And so where am I going to go with this? Like, I have to get this out or my head's going to explode. And so if you go all the way back on the page, which those posts are still there. I haven't deleted any of them, but you'll kind of see the frustration there of me kind of working through that. And that was the first probably 1.5, 2 years of the page was just me like working through the anger and the animosity and the anxiety of that whole like, how does that happen? Because I had this vision of what church was supposed to be, and then that got crushed. Well, that's how we got the page. But come to find out, that apparently is a lot of people's experience. And so that's kind of how it started growing. Now, obviously, I don't know if we'll talk about it later. It's morphed into what it is now, which is totally different than what it started out to be. But that's how it came about. And the crazy thing is, and what I tell people a lot, especially when they're going through difficult situations, not that story is the most difficult situation I've ever been through, but it was obviously a pivotal moment in my life. But like, you don't see where God is taking you in those hard parts. For example, me and my wife have laughed about this. So like, the reason I'm talking to you right now is because that happened.
True.
And I just think you have to work through it, and you have to understand that like in the moment, what you think is like this terrible thing may be, but it could also be God doing something in you that you would never, ever ask him to do to bring you to a much better place. I'm in a much better place now than I was then, but if I had stayed there, I would have never known that. But that's how the page came about, long story short. So
wow, that's a very interesting story. And honestly, to hear that the pastor stayed to lead a population that was split 51-49, at first I was like, who in their right mind would stay to lead a group that was like split half and half? But if you think about it, that's kind of been our presidency for our country over the past 5 years. So it's like, okay, I guess people just decide to do that.
Hey y'all, we hope you loved this conversation. Here at Young Married Christian, we are on a mission to see a gospel-centered home made available for every single child in the foster care system. There are 400,000 kids in the foster care system, and there are 400,000 churches in America. Wow.
That is crazy.
This is absolutely a solvable problem, and we want to be a part of it. If you want to join us in that mission, text the word freedom to 833-370-1610.
833-370-1610. 833-370-1610.
I just did it.
And another thing you can do that is really helpful is to smash the like button on this video.
Smash it like Satan's face. Crush it like it's Lucifer's head.
It really helps us a ton, so smash that like button, subscribe to this channel,
That's it.
smash the like button on this video.